It all started with a joke, a throwaway comment at the dinner table. I thought it was harmless, but that single moment unraveled my marriage, destroyed my closest friendships, and revealed secrets I never could have imagined. What came next changed my life forever. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to bare my soul online, but here I am, doing exactly that. There's a hard lesson in my story, one I hope might save someone from stumbling into the same mess I did. This isn't some made-up tale designed to entertain you. It's real, my life, my truth, and yeah, it's about as ugly as it gets. But if sharing this helps even one person avoid being as blind and naive as I was, then it's worth it. Let me start with a proper introduction. Hi, I'm the guy whose life got flipped upside down because of a joke. A joke. Sounds ridiculous, right? Yet, it was that offhand remark that uncovered the fact that my wife, the woman I thought I'd grow old with, was betraying me in the worst way. Before we dive headfirst into the chaos, though, let me set the stage and give you some context, so you can fully grasp just how thoroughly I was deceived. I'm in my early 40s now. I'm the kind of guy who's starting to see a few grays creeping into his brown hair, thanks, life, but I stay in shape. I'm not a fitness guru or anything, but I take care of myself. I've got a decent job as a project manager at a mid-sized firm. It's not glamorous, but it pays well enough to keep our family comfortable. We're not swimming in money, but we've never had to worry about making ends meet, and I've always taken pride in being able to provide for us. I thought I was doing everything right, keeping things steady, holding down the fort. But man, I had no idea what was simmering beneath the surface. And then there's Emma, my wife. We met about 13 years ago, and from the moment I saw her, I was floored. She's blonde, tall, and strikingly beautiful, the kind of woman who makes heads turn just by walking into a room. And she wasn't just gorgeous, she had this sharp, confident presence about her that drew me in immediately. To say I was smitten would be an understatement. I wasn't immune to Emma's charm, not by a long shot. When we first met, I fell hard, like head over heels, can't believe my luck, kind of hard. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. She had this magnetic energy about her, this constant drive for something more, bigger, better, shinier. At first, I loved that about her. She pushed me to aim higher, made me feel like we were building a future together. But as the years went by, it became increasingly clear that bigger and better didn't necessarily include us. It was about her. More attention, more compliments, more stuff. Emma had an appetite for expensive things, designer bags, the latest phones, shiny new jewelry. I tried to keep up, buying her what I could, but honestly, it was a losing game. There was always something else on her wish list, something just out of reach. For the first few years of our marriage, Emma didn't work. She stayed home with our son while I worked myself to the bone to make sure we were comfortable. When our son started school, though, she decided to get a job at this upscale gym as a personal trainer. It seemed harmless at the time, honestly, I was relieved she'd found something to focus on other than shopping or being frustrated with me for not spending enough time with her. Now, about our son, he's 8 years old, and let me tell you, I love that kid more than life itself. He's got this fiery red hair that's always been a bit of a family joke because, well, Emma's blonde, I'm a brunette, and he doesn't look much like either of us. Sure, I understand genetics can throw you a curveball, but it's become this running gag in our house. I joke around, saying, maybe I need to have a chat with the mailman, or something equally dumb. Emma would usually laugh or roll her eyes, playing along. But then came that dinner. Just a casual night at home. I cracked my usual joke, maybe I should go have a word with the neighbor about where our little redhead came from. Normally, it was met with a laugh or a sarcastic comment. This time, though, Emma's reaction was different. I said it half laughing, barely looking up as I shoveled food into my mouth. It was just one of those tired, harmless jokes, the kind that's more of a habit than a punchline because you've said it so many times before. Normally, it would land with a sigh or a sarcastic comment from Emma. But this time, her reaction was different. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. Instead, she froze, just for a split second, but it was there. Her smile dropped for the briefest moment before she forced it back into place, like someone had pressed pause on her face and then hit play again. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but something about that flicker of hesitation stuck with me. It felt like I'd hit a nerve, but I had no idea why. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was reading too much into it. But over the next few days, I started noticing things, small things. Tiny details that wouldn't normally even register if you weren't already on edge. Like how her phone suddenly seemed glued to her side. Sure, everyone keeps their phone close these days, but Emma used to leave hers lying around without a second thought. Now, it was always in her hand, her pocket, or placed face down on the table. And every time it buzzed, she'd grab it like it was a live grenade. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Work had been stressing me out, and I hadn't been home as much as I should have been. Long hours, late nights, early mornings, I was busting my tail to keep everything afloat. Emma had always complained about how much time I spent at work, but in my mind, I was doing it for us. For her and for our son. But that look at dinner. I couldn't shake it. It was like a tiny crack had appeared in the foundation of my trust, and now every little thing started to feel like a sign. I figured the growing distance between us was just a result of my long hours at work. I told myself it was normal, that we were just going through one of those phases every couple hits. But looking back now, I realize maybe I should have seen the signs sooner. Take the girls' nights, for example. They weren't anything new. Emma had always had her circle of friends she'd go out with every now and then. But lately, they were happening more frequently, and she was coming home later and later. Sometimes she'd stumble in a little too drunk for what was supposed to be a casual night out. I'd ask her how it was, and she'd just shrug, saying, "Oh, the usual," maybe tossing out the name of someone I didn't know. I didn't push it. Why would I? She was an adult, and I trusted her. At least, I thought I did. But here's the thing about trust, once you get even the smallest reason to doubt it, that doubt starts to spread like a virus. You start replaying moments in your head, questioning everything. I'd lie awake at night thinking about that look on her face when I joked about our son's red hair. Was there more to it than I wanted to admit? Was she hiding something? Or was I just turning into some paranoid, insecure mess? And then there were my friends, Tom, Bob, and Rick. We'd been tight since college, and those guys had always been my lifeline. Every few weeks, we'd carve out some time to get away from the grind. Fishing, hiking, renting a cabin in the middle of nowhere, it didn't matter what we did, as long as we were unplugged and together. It was our way to decompress, to be a bunch of guys in the wild, forgetting about the pressures of work and family life for a few days. But Emma? She hated those trips. Every time I'd pack my bag, she'd throw me this look, like I was abandoning her. "You're going off with your buddies again," she'd ask. "What about me? What about your family?" And maybe she had a point. Maybe I was selfish for needing that escape now and then. But those trips kept me sane. They were my outlet, a way to let off steam so I could face all the pressures waiting for me back home. Besides, it wasn't like I was leaving her in the lurch. I always made sure everything was handled before I left. Or at least I thought I did. I didn't think disappearing for a weekend every couple of weeks was a big deal. In my mind, it was harmless, a way to recharge so I could handle everything life was throwing at me. But while I was off fishing or hiking with the guys, Emma was back at home. And looking back now, I realized she wasn't just sitting around, waiting for me to walk through the door. What she was doing, I couldn't say at the time. I didn't have a clue. I've always had this messed up sense of humor, one that's gotten me into trouble more times than I can count. But it's also saved me in tense situations, defusing moments that could have gone south fast. Little did I know that same sense of humor was about to blow my entire marriage wide open. It started with that moment at the dinner table, the way Emma froze for that split second after my dumb joke about our son's red hair. I couldn't get it out of my head. It was like a splinter lodged in the back of my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it, it just wouldn't go away. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if there was something real behind my gut feeling, but it got me thinking. About relationships, about trust, and yeah, about cheating. It wasn't something I'd ever dwelled on before. But one night, after a long day at work, I was scrolling through YouTube, looking for something mindless to help me unwind. That's when I stumbled on a video that, looking back, I wish I'd skipped. It was this guy pranking his wife by pretending he was cheating on her. The setup was simple: he casually dropped a fake confession, recorded her reaction, and, predictably, she lost it. She screamed, threw stuff, the whole 9 yards. By the end, though, they were both laughing it off, with her rolling her eyes at his joke. The whole thing was silly, but for some reason, I couldn't stop watching it. Something about it stuck with me, lingering in the back of my head. And then, because I can't help myself, I started thinking, what if I tried that with Emma? She's always had a jealous streak, not about my guy friends, but about this imaginary harem of women she's convinced exist somewhere in my orbit. It was classic Emma, blowing things out of proportion, making mountains out of molehills. At least, that's what I thought at the time. And my dumb brain decided, wouldn't it be funny to prank her the same way? Turns out, I had no idea what I was about to set in motion. Emma had this idea fixed in her head, that whenever I went on trips with Tom, Bob, and Rick, I wasn't just hanging out with the guys. Every time I came back, it was the same routine, passive-aggressive comments and questions like, where do you really go? Who are you really with? It was exhausting. No matter how much I reassured her, told her it was just the guys, she never seemed to believe me. The thing is, I'd never given her a reason to doubt me. I've never been the cheating type, and I was always upfront about where I was and who I was with. But no matter what I said, she seemed convinced that every moment I wasn't glued to her side, I was off climbing into bed with some random woman. So, in my slightly twisted head, I thought, why not prank her like the guy in that video? Let her see how it feels when the shoe's on the other foot. At the time, it seemed harmless, just a way to mess with her a little and maybe make her realize how ridiculous her accusations were. I had no idea the hornet's nest I was about to kick. It happened one night after I'd been out with Tom and Bob. We'd had a few drinks, and I came home feeling a little tipsy but still in control. Emma, as expected, was already in her usual mood. The moment I walked in the door, she started throwing passive-aggressive jabs about how I'd probably been out with other women. Normally, I'd either brush it off or we'd get into a pointless argument. But this time, with the alcohol buzzing in my veins and that stupid YouTube video still playing on a loop in my head, I decided to go for it. I was going to pull off the best fake confession she'd ever seen. Quietly, I set my phone on the counter, making sure it was angled just right to catch the whole thing. Then, I turned to her, putting on my best guilty face, the kind of look that says, I've been carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Emma noticed immediately. She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes, sensing something was up. Well, she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. In that moment, I thought I was in control. I thought I was about to pull off the ultimate prank. I couldn't have been more wrong. I've been cheating on you too. At first, I laughed. I mean, come on, we were in the middle of a prank, right? This had to be her way of playing along, trying to one-up me. I even shot back a snide comment, something like, oh yeah. With who? Bob? Tom? The words came out as a joke, half laughing, but the second I looked at her, I knew. Her expression didn't change, no smirk, no grin. She just stared at me, dead serious. Yes, she said. With both of them. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a second, I was sure she was messing with me, giving me a taste of my own medicine. But the punchline never came. The silence stretched, and it hit me like a freight train. She wasn't joking. After that, everything blurred. The conversation dissolved into shouting, accusations flying back and forth, words that I'll probably never fully remember. What I do remember is the crushing weight of it all. At some point, I stumbled out of the house, collapsing onto the doorstep. I sat there with my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. My entire world had imploded in an instant, and the one stupid prank I thought would be funny had pulled the trigger. Emma's betrayal hurt, no question. But Tom? That was a different kind of pain altogether. Tom wasn't just a friend. We'd been close for over a decade, ever since college. He'd been there for some of the biggest moments in my life, my wedding, the birth of my son. I'd trusted him implicitly, leaned on him like a brother. And now I knew he'd been sleeping with my wife behind my back. The betrayal was like a knife that wouldn't stop twisting. The more I thought about it, the more the anger consumed me. I couldn't just let it go. I wasn't wired that way. I wasn't the kind of guy who could sit back and lick his wounds quietly. And my other friend, Bob? When I told him everything, he didn't try to talk me down. He just looked at me, calm and steady, and asked, "What do you want to do?" That's when the plan started to form. I knew Tom had a lot to lose, more than just his friendship with me. He had a great job, a wife, and 2 kids. That's right, he had his own picture-perfect family, all while around with my wife behind the scenes. The hypocrisy of it was staggering, and the more I thought about it, the clearer my next move became. If Tom had shattered my world, I'd make sure his would come crashing down too. I wasn't just going to end the friendship. That wasn't enough. I was going to dismantle Tom's life piece by piece. His perfect image, his family, his reputation, everything. The anger inside me was blinding, and seeing the evidence of his betrayal laid out in black and white only made it burn hotter. Each text, each photo, it was like pouring salt on an open wound. But that pain, it sharpened my focus. I had what I needed to expose him. Now, I just had to figure out the most devastating way to do it. That's where Rick came in. Rick was another one of our longtime friends, but more importantly, he knew Tom's wife well. Katie, let's call her that, was kind and genuine, someone I'd always thought highly of. She didn't deserve to be in the dark about the man she was married to, and I knew she'd be the key to bringing Tom down. The opportunity came at a group gathering one weekend. Tom was there, acting like nothing was wrong, laughing and joking with everyone like the world hadn't just crumbled around me. I wanted to march right up to him and knock him out, but I kept my cool. I had a bigger plan. Rick and I managed to pull Katie aside after a few drinks, careful not to make a scene. She looked confused but followed us without much questioning. Once we were out of earshot, I pulled out my phone and showed her everything, the texts, the photos, all of it. At first, she didn't believe me. She just stared at the screen, her face blank as if her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. But as the moments passed, the reality set in. She needed to know the truth. She deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. Katie didn't cry or scream, she was stronger than I'd expected. Instead, she stood there, staring at the ground in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up at me, her voice steady, and asked, "What do we do now?" That's when I laid out the rest of the plan. We weren't just going to confront Tom, no, that was too easy. I wanted him to feel trapped, cornered. I wanted to destroy the illusion he'd so carefully crafted while making him watch it all fall apart. Katie agreed to play along. We set the trap for the following weekend, another gathering where everything would go down. When the day came, Katie played her part perfectly. She waited until the room was full, everyone chatting and comfortable, before delivering the blow. Her voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Jack showed me everything." The room went silent. Tom turned to her, confusion and panic written all over his face. Then he looked at me. His face went pale, his mouth hanging open, but no words came out. He knew. In that moment, he knew his carefully constructed world was about to implode. I could see it in Tom's eyes, the panic, the realization that everything he had built was crumbling before him. That look of betrayal mirrored the one I had carried since the moment I learned the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a tiny flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was something. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, and the silence in the room was deafening. Tom's world was collapsing in front of everyone he cared about, and I was content to let him stew in it. But there was still more work to do, because this betrayal wasn't just about Tom. There was Bob, too. If there was one thing Bob cared about more than anything else, it was his money. His bank account was his pride and joy, and I knew that's where I could hurt him the most. After everything that had happened with Tom, I didn't waste a second. The anger I had been nursing for months had become an inferno, and I wasn't about to hold back anymore. This wasn't just personal, it needed to be precise. I couldn't take the same approach I had with Tom. Bob was a different kind of target. A direct confrontation wouldn't have the same impact. No, Bob required a smarter strategy, one that would hit him where it hurt the most. That's where Rick came in. He had been instrumental in taking down Tom, but this time, I needed his tech skills more than anything else. Over a few beers one night, I laid out the plan. Rick listened carefully, and when I was done, he didn't hesitate for a second. He was all in. We started by combing through Bob's public profiles, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the usual places. Bob had a habit of bragging online, so it wasn't hard to find out where he was investing his money or what opportunities he was excited about. The next step was where Rick's expertise really came into play. With his skills, we created a fake investment opportunity, an elaborate ruse designed specifically to lure Bob in. We built a professional-looking website for a fictional startup that promised massive returns for early investors. It was slick, polished, and just flashy enough to catch Bob's attention without raising suspicion. The best part? Once Bob was in, his own greed would do most of the work for us. All we had to do was wait for him to bite. And knowing Bob, it wouldn't take long. The fake investment opportunity was exactly the kind of thing Bob would pounce on: cutting-edge tech, huge growth potential, and just the right amount of hype to make it irresistible. Rick and I went all out building the setup. The website looked professional and polished, with fake testimonials, links to dummy profiles on financial sites, and a healthy dose of buzzwords to make it seem legit. We even created a fake team of founders, complete with headshots and biographies. Then came the bait. One evening, I casually brought it up while talking with Bob. I mentioned this incredible opportunity I'd stumbled upon and dropped just enough detail to pique his interest. Of course, I played it cool, acting unsure about whether I was going to invest myself, which only made him press harder. He wanted to know more, grilling me for details and practically begging me to send him the link. That's when I gave him the fake site and told him to check it out for himself. It didn't take long. Within a week, Bob was hooked. He threw a sizable chunk of cash into the startup. It wasn't enough to completely ruin him, at least not yet, but it was a significant dent in his portfolio, and if it vanished, it would sting. And that was the beauty of it: once Bob was in, he did the rest of the work himself. He couldn't stop talking about the investment, hyping it up to everyone in his circle. He bragged about his insider knowledge and even started pushing others to jump in. It was everything we hoped for. The more he talked, the more committed he became. Then, just like that, the startup vanished. The website went offline, the fake profiles disappeared, and every trace of the operation was scrubbed clean. It was as if the whole thing had never existed. The fallout was immediate. Bob was furious, calling everyone he knew, desperately trying to figure out what had happened. He reached out to lawyers, financial advisors, even tech experts, pulling every string he could think of to trace where his money had gone. But there was nothing, no trail, no leads, nothing to recover. The more he dug, the more he realized he'd been played. And the worst part? He couldn't tell anyone. Admitting he'd been scammed would mean admitting he wasn't as clever or savvy as he thought. Bob prided himself on being the smartest guy in the room, and this would have shattered that image. He was trapped, angry, humiliated, and completely in the dark about who had orchestrated the whole thing. As for Rick, he wiped his hands clean once it was all done. We didn't need to talk about it much afterward. We knew we'd done what needed to be done. And the best part? Bob never suspected it was me. I got my revenge on Tom and Bob, and for a while, the satisfaction of knowing they'd both paid for what they did was enough. It felt like justice, poetic and personal. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. There was still one person left, Emma. After everything that had gone down with Tom and Bob, you'd think the divorce process would have been straightforward. It wasn't. Emma came at me hard, demanding an obscene amount of alimony. It was far more than I had anticipated, especially considering she had a job now. But that wasn't even the worst part. The real gut punch was her demand for child support. She didn't just want the standard amount. No, she wanted enough to live comfortably, extravagantly, even, off that check for years to come. The amount she was asking for wasn't just about providing for our son, it was about funding her shopping sprees and maintaining her lifestyle without lifting a finger. At first, I was resigned to it. I told myself I'd raised our son for 8 years, and no matter how messy things got between Emma and me, he didn't deserve to suffer for it. But as the days dragged on, something gnawed at me. The doubts that had been planted all those months ago started creeping back. That moment at the dinner table when Emma froze after my joke about his red hair, it resurfaced, sharper than ever. Eventually, I asked for a DNA test. It felt like a last resort, something I didn't want to do but couldn't avoid any longer. I needed to know. Part of me felt like I was betraying him just by questioning it. He was my son in every way that mattered, his laughter, his milestones, the countless memories we'd shared. But after everything Emma had put me through, I couldn't ignore the possibility. I had to be sure. And deep down, I was terrified of what I might find. I had to protect myself. After everything Emma had done, I couldn't let her take everything, not if there was even the slightest chance she was lying about this, too. The DNA test wasn't just a gamble, it was my only shot at finding out the truth once and for all. When the results came in a week later, I remember sitting in my car, staring at the envelope, my hands shaking. I opened it, and there it was, the final betrayal. He wasn't mine. 8 years of love, memories, and fatherhood, all unraveled in a single moment. That truth cut deeper than anything else Emma had done. It broke me in ways I didn't even know were possible. My lawyer was ready, though. He'd seen cases like this before and knew how to navigate the next steps. The DNA results dismantled Emma's claims in court. Without proof that the child was mine, there was no way she could demand child support. Of course, she fought it, throwing every excuse she could think of at the judge. She argued that I'd raised him, that I was still his father, and that the test didn't matter. But the law didn't side with her. The case fell apart, leaving her with nothing to stand on. She was furious, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I'd fought tooth and nail to protect myself from her lies, and for once, I came out on top. The aftermath wasn't pretty. Walking away from a child I'd loved and raised felt like losing a part of myself. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't stay trapped in the wreckage Emma had created. It wasn't my fault, it was hers. I had to let go, as painful as it was, to rebuild my life from the ground up. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I left everything behind, the house, the town, even my job. I needed distance, not just physically, but emotionally, from everything that had happened. A new place, a new job, a new life, it all felt foreign at first, but it was a step toward healing. The memories of Emma, of the child I thought was mine, of the betrayals, they stayed with me, haunting my quiet moments. But I refused to let them define me anymore. I wasn't the same man who had made that dumb joke at the dinner table, oblivious to the storm brewing under his own roof. I was someone new, someone stronger. And as I pieced my life back together, one day at a time, I realized I could survive this. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to face it. I'm not the same person I was. Life has a way of hardening you after so much betrayal, but it also teaches you lessons you can't ignore. I'm tougher now, maybe a little colder, but I've also grown smarter, more aware of what I want and need in life. After the divorce and selling the house, staying in that city wasn't an option. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of what I'd lost, of the pain I'd been through. It was suffocating. Leaving wasn't just a choice, it was survival. Moving to a new city gave me a clean slate. Starting over was daunting, stripping my life down to the essentials and figuring out how to rebuild. But I found a job, nothing flashy, just enough to get by and give me structure. Slowly, piece by piece, I began putting my life back together. New routines, new faces, new beginnings. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Of course, the past hasn't completely let go of me. Sometimes, late at night, the memories creep in. I think about the boy I raised as my son, the one I loved with everything I had. None of what happened was his fault. He was as blindsided as I was, and the guilt of walking away still haunts me. Maybe someday, when he's older and ready, we'll have the chance to reconnect. But for now, I've had to step back, for my own sanity. Right now, I need to focus on healing, on becoming someone whole again. To everyone who's been following my story, I want to say thank you. Whether you left a comment, sent a message, or just quietly read along, your support has been a light during my darkest moments. It reminded me that even in the worst times, I wasn't alone. That kind of encouragement means more than I can put into words. For those of you going through your own struggles right now, I want you to know there's hope. Even when it feels like you'll never recover, like the weight is too much to bear, you can get through it. Life goes on, and you'll find your strength again. It's not quick, and it's never easy, but every step forward brings you closer to peace. So, thank you for being here with me through this journey. I wish all of you happiness, strength, and clarity, no matter where life takes you. Keep pushing forward. The life you deserve is worth fighting for.